Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today I'm super excited to welcome back my very good friend and strategy sensei, Alex Smith, who has, I'm sure at the time I recorded this, is a bit like the LinkedIn fucking pandemic at the minute. You've gone viral, mate. Our conversation last time was insane. We dove deep into the weeds of strategy, how to escape competition as a challenger brand, how to be bold, courageous and rambunctious in that strategy. And I'm super excited just kind of for a follow-up because there's bits we didn't really, or avenues we didn't get to meander down last time. So cheers for coming, boy. Appreciate it.
No, what a pleasure it is to be back and so soon as well. I will try not to repeat myself. I should have listened to the other one beforehand, but I don't know. We'll see. I'll probably instinctively remember.
So you've had this, I remember when we were in that not studio, how dare I say that? It's sinful to call it studio, but we were above that pub when we recorded last time. I think it was in the beginning of the summer. And it was the Ring pub in Southwark. And I remember as we were packing up, you said to me, oh, mate, I really want to grow on LinkedIn. I really want to grow that following. I'm going to put in the work. I'm getting 10 likes per post, but I'm just going to keep showing up. And fair play to you. You've done that religiously. You've been there every day where you've got 5 likes or 20 likes or 30 likes. And then not out of the ether, because I've always thought your content's fucking banging. That's why we get on so well. And we're kindred spirits in many ways. But then it has had this sort of wildfire, rip-roaring explosion of late. And your name is becoming synonymous with strategy. And we're going to go into that. And I want to pick and pull at that and the nuances and the tactics of how you got that huge growth. But what we didn't touch upon last time is we kind of defined what strategy was. I want to reverse back and understand your why. Where did this, where and why, I suppose is the jump off point. Why are you obsessed with strategy and where and when did this obsession begin to kind of bounce around your noggin, if that makes sense?
Well, it depends how far you want to go back. Because, if you go far enough back, I have no obsession with strategy. This is just literally happens to be the word which I can apply to monetizing my personality, monetizing something which I just do automatically. And that thing happens to be pretty close to strategy. So you wrap a bow around it, call it strategy, and that's what I do. So that was the original sort of zenith. I got no more kind of academic interest in strategy than I had in carpentry or whatever, if you go back 10 years ago. But, I would have been a pretty shit carpenter, but this is something that I can do. But then obviously, you get into the field and you learn about it and, you read the books and you practice the craft and then you start to get a point of view on that craft. And the one thing that over time has become very clear about strategy as a sort of subject matter as a whole is that the way that it's presented is dreadful. It is horrible. Because what we're talking about here is a means by which a business can 10, 50, 100x its returns by pure thought alone, right? So when you put it that way, you'd think, oh, that's quite a useful thing. That's quite an interesting thing. Who wouldn't be into that? But then at the same time, this is a topic where it's become a kind of a cliche and a joke to say, oh, what does strategy mean anyway? Or I don't understand strategy, or all of the kind of the murkiness and frankly well-deserved cynicism around the subject. So why is it that we have a subject here, which on the one hand, in principle, is the most fundamental skill and most high leverage skill in all of business. But on the other hand, it's something that 99 out of 100 people in business don't really get, don't really do, kind of don't pay any attention to. And the evidence of this, I think it's something I mentioned last time, the evidence of this is clear that how many branding agencies are there out there? There are thousands upon thousands. How many pure play strategy agencies? Almost zero. So that's just a reflection of the fact that this isn't something that people are engaging with. This isn't something people are shopping for. This isn't something that people are even thinking about. So there's this huge problem here of, what would we call it? Would we call it accessibility? Would we call it presentation? There's something missing. And, if you read the classic strategy books, so your Understanding Michael Porter or your Blue Ocean Strategy, these kind of things, and you look at the concepts within them, they're absolutely killer. They're amazing. They're things that every single person in business should know, but they don't. So part of what I've become interested in, and I guess part of my why, to bring it back to your question, is to fix that, is to make it so that the principles, which ultimately, are the same no matter which kind of strategy guru you go to, that these principles become things that, number one, people understand, number two, people can apply, and then number three, maybe most importantly of all, that people are actually interested in, because this stuff is interesting and it is motivational, it is fun, but you wouldn't know that to pick up. I mean, I got Understanding Michael Porter right here, right? This book is amazing, but my God, who would want to pick that up? Nobody. How many people in your audience have read Understanding Michael Porter? Very few, but it's fantastic. But that is that's a stylistic problem, right? It's not a content problem.
Strategy needs a rebrand, and I'll be honest. When I started reading your content, this is many yonks ago, all about strategy, I just thought strategy just conjures up. It just reminded me of some nerd boff in it who'd never started a bloody business, being like, right, this is how we're gonna make this work. We're gonna pull this lever. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that, and it's just it's an unsexy word, or it's become so synonymous with boring. Where I think it's I don't know where I've read or heard this, but something like 99% of all LinkedIn profiles have the word strategist in it. Versus the word versus the word execution, right? Because everyone says we can sit there and strategize, and that's why I think, and I really do believe you're leading the renaissance of strategy. That's not blowing smoke up your ass. I genuinely do believe that, because you're linking strategy to escaping competition. If I say the word, what's your strategy, people, it doesn't really rouse much emotional reaction in me. But if when you frame it as strategy to escape competition, I'm like, right, I'm at the table, let's talk, right? But for so long, the word strategy has become synonymous with convoluted bollocks, is what I would say, corporate convoluted bollocks. And it's going to take, someone like yourself who is showing up every day and saying, this is the way to escape competition. This is the way to create the category of one. There's, I don't know if you've seen the Land Rover advert, which I just love. And it's this, imagine a freeway or a motorway, if you're English. And on that motorway, it's chock-a-blocker. It's like rush hour. And adjacent, just to the left of the motorway, is this big desert. Or like beach almost, and on that motorway, on that desert, is just a Land Rover just shining off, and it's not on the motorway.
It's recent,
and I don't know where I saw it. I don't know where. No, it's not recent. It's like I saw it on Twitter, I think, but it's a great example of what's wrong with strategy. Basically, why strategy is great is you can get out of the motorway and be the Range Rover or Land Rover and escape your competition. But then the issue with strategy is that everyone's saying they're a strategist, i.e. everyone's on the motorway, so it's a super crowded place. It's quite an interesting... I'll send you the picture, mate, because it's a sick picture. But going back to where you said I wasn't into strategy at all. It was just a way to put a bow around my skill set. When was that? Like, what time frame was that? And what is your why? Like, what if it's not necessarily the word strategy, but what's your why, if that makes sense?
On a personal level,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, if I put it in terms of the thing that I do, which I've then put a bow around on, there's only one thing that I really do, which is unusual. And that is, if you think about it, that some people have the natural propensity to zoom in. You might call them a detail-oriented person. And then equally, other people might have a natural propensity to zoom out. And these aren't, things that they're doing consciously. They're just things that they just do. If you think of that as a spectrum, I bury the needle in a very peculiar way on the zooming out factor. And this isn't just to do with business. This is just to do with everything. I want to understand how things work at the highest, if you want to get esoteric about it, at the highest metaphysical, spiritual level, and business strategy is just a microcosm of that, because there is a sort of existential question at the heart of every single business. Ultimately, what is this thing? And that is actually the same question as the strategic question for that business. And you could package this in a kind of woo-woo way, or you could package it in a hard business language way, but it's all exactly the same thing. And so this is just something which I just get pleasure from. I'm not invested necessarily in the results, but it's my way of relaxing. It's my flow state to ask the question, what is this thing really? And you can ask that about anything. I follow football. I ask the same questions within following football as I do, let's say, working on a business. It's just a process, that I enjoy. And I actually think that, personal opinion, I think that this is an error that a lot of people really fall foul of in their careers, where everybody wants to have meaningful work, and everyone would agree with that. Everyone's looking for that. And what everyone thinks that what meaningful work is they think it's work where the output of the work is something meaningful. So I'm curing cancer, I'm digging wells in Africa, whatever. They want to make some sort of positive impact on the world. And I'll completely agree that is one variety of meaningful work. And if you really care about the output of your work, then you might be happy, let's say, being an accountant for a business that's pulling plastic out of the ocean, because you're so motivated by pulling plastic out of the ocean. And the fact that you're an accountant or whatever, you don't care what you're doing. You're just doing something that's helping towards that goal. But for most people, the thing that I think would really give them satisfaction is not the output. The output is a red herring. The thing that matters more is the process. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? So just to use that particular example, like, you might much prefer, let's say, working in a vibrant team in a cardboard box company than doing some rote manual task for a business that's got some amazing altruistic purpose. Everyone's looking for a meaningful end result. No one's looking for a meaningful process. Now, for me, this work is meaningful process. It isn't meaningful end result. Obviously, I care. I care that my clients succeed and all the rest of it. But I'm, it's not like my life's mission is to make my clients succeed. That's that's just like the result of the game. What I like is the process of doing it. And so, I don't know, I feel like I've seen a lot of people who I've known personally who they're chasing meaningful work, a better job, a job that's going to make them excited to wake up in the morning. And the only way they're thinking about it is, I need to go work for a charity, or I need to go and work for a sort of purposeful brand like Patagonia or whatever. Nobody's asking the question of, what am I doing day to day when I work for that company? And that is much, much quicker way to get meaning.
Playing that back to you, it's almost like your why is the question why. And I love what you said there. That's why I resonate with you. Is I've got a ability to constantly ask the question, why is that like that? Why is that? Why are we doing on that scale of zoom in versus zoom out? Zooming out and always asking why, whether that's why about business, why about football, why about the universe. It is a skill set. And actually, I interviewed Rory Sutherland again the other week, and he was basically saying he said the best MBA is either to work in a corner shop or work as a kitchen porter in a kitchen. The reason being, it allows you to see a business as a whole system and how those different things interweave, right? Whereas when you specialize, and business school makes us specialize, education makes us specialized, you basically, you're siloed off into seeing one small factor, i.e. finance or MPD or branding. You don't zoom out and see the whole thing. And his whole point was the reason Indians and Pakistanis and Jewish have done so well. He genuinely believes this. If you were to zoom out, but like what we're doing now, look at it. It's because they all started in corner shops, or they had this job, or worked in a family business where they had to see the system, the business as a whole system. And he, you know what Roy's like, he's so good. He goes, you wouldn't give 9 different people a chunk of Sudoku and expect them to solve the whole puzzle. You need to zoom out and see the whole thing. And I was like, mate, you're just too good at this. But it is what you say there, where you zoom out, and it really is a superpower. So taking a fork in the road here. So what other stuff are you zooming out on that isn't strategy? Because I sit awake lay awake at night zooming out on all sorts of shit, right? Like I'm like, why? There's a book I was reading about trees, right? It's a sick book. It's a story all about trees, but the protagonist it's written from the view of a tree, right? So you read this book, and it's Hugh Jackman's favorite book, and suddenly I'm looking outside, I'm looking at trees, I'm like, oh my god, a tree has been here. That tree out there has probably been here whilst World War I was going on, whilst the Great Depression was going on, and you're like, it's suddenly it changes your whole perspective. But it's zooming out, you're like, why? Do you know what I mean? Or zooming out and why? So what are some of the stuff outside of strategy, outside of the day-to-day, are you zooming out on and thinking about?
I mean, a recent one is, well, a recent one, to be honest, is always, you know, really what the hell am I doing with my life? I mean, I strongly believe that dynamically a business and a person are exactly the same if you were to think about it in terms of their how you link their sort of their bigger picture missions and how they cascade down into sort of tactical actions. You can pretty much draw a direct mirror across from them. And you know, I've been doing this work for a while, and you know, I've been a sort of successful solo consultant, I suppose, but it's all been a bit trivial, if I'm honest, and you know, a bit like, well, it's something that I do for work, and you know, it's a better job than the average job, but what am I going to do next, or what is the point of all of this? I don't mean what is the meaning of life, not quite that big, but just, you know, what am I doing with myself, and what am I going to be doing with myself for the next 20 years? And actually, I had a real sort of epiphany on that recently, watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary on Netflix. Did you see that?
Yeah, that's got me doing hits in the morning trying to get Tonk and lose the beer derby. So yeah, I have watched that documentary.
And what it made me realise was there's nothing that more important than being hench. No, if only that was the case. No, he didn't say this directly, but it really strongly came across that what I realised was that. So obviously he's super famous for being a great goal setter and getter. So I want to be the world's greatest bodybuilder. He achieved it. I want to be the world's biggest movie star. He achieved it. I want to have the highest possible political office for a foreign-born American. He achieved it. You know, so sets his goals, achieves them. Everyone's like, okay, yeah, that's great. That's how you set goals. And there's nothing sort of superficially unusual about that. But when I was watching it, what I realized was that there actually is something really different about the way that he sets goals. And I don't know, it just sort of totally blew my mind, really, which is that most people if you ask them, what is the point of a goal? It sounds like a stupid question, because that's like asking, what is the point of a point? Like, the goal is the point. Like, if I set a goal to get a promotion at work, the point of that is to get a promotion at work. Or if I set a goal to lose 20 pounds, the goal of that is to lose 20 pounds. So there isn't a kind of secondary purpose to a goal. But when you looked at the way that he did them, there was not only a secondary purpose, there was a different primary purpose, which was that you could see that his goals weren't really about achieving the thing. It was more about setting a challenge for himself, which could shape his whole life. So they were like a game where he would set this giant goal in the future, knowing that the path to get to that goal would be essentially an incredible life in and of itself. So, you know, if you're this kid growing up in the middle of nowhere in Austria and you set a goal to become the world's #1 bodybuilder, you don't know how you're going to achieve that. But one thing you do know is that the path to get there is going to be bloody wild. And you're basically going to fucking live life in trying to chase that goal. You compare that to, like, if you set a goal to, let's say, lose 20 pounds or get promoted at work. There is no adventure between where you are now and there. You know how to do it, and you've got to plod away, and eventually you'll do it. Now, it's not like that's not worthless. Obviously not at all. That's very valuable. But you see, it's not the same thing. He set goals in order to give himself an adventure, to give himself some wild way of living. And then he just had this insane life. And ultimately, if he actually hadn't achieved the goal, if he'd only been like the #3 bodybuilder in the world, or if he'd only been a mediocrely successful movie star, the goal still would have worked. He still would have had this incredible time. So it's not really, it doesn't really matter what the goal is. You don't even necessarily have to want it too much. What matters is the goal a type of goal which is going to furnish a playful, adventurous life? And you can actually think about this in business terms too, looping it back to that, because, you know, by the same token, a business could set a goal where, okay, we have no idea how we're going to get this thing, but if we go all out to try and get it, some crazy stuff is going to happen, and it's going to be a ride. So, you know, the central characteristic of goals like this is that they are goals that you have no idea how to get. And because of that, you're going to have to go out there and meet new people. You're going to have to do new things. You're going to have to travel to new places. You're going to have to learn new skills. You're going to have to do all of this stuff because at the moment you don't know how to get there. So I sort of stopped and I thought about this in terms of my life. And I thought, well, actually, if I think about it like that, what I'm doing now, which I find a little bit boring, let's say, not boring, but like a bit like, oh, this is fine.
Thanks, mate. No, joking.
If I applied that thinking to being a strategy consultant or whatever I am, suddenly it turns this day-to-day thing into something that's kind of wild. So, I mean, this isn't exactly the way I've done it, but just to illustrate the point, let's say that I said, right, I want to be a solo one-man consultancy who's earning 10 million a year in fees, just to pick a number out of thin air, right? I don't earn 10 million a year in fees. And I would be more than happy to earn 5 million a year in fees. The number is completely arbitrary. But the point is, what the hell would I have to do to actually become like that? Now that's a question. That's an adventure of sorts. Not quite as cool as Arnold's adventures, but not bad. And it completely changes the game. It completely changes the mindset. Suddenly, your kind of ordinary job could be this sort of wild ride. Do you see what I mean?
Completely. And I think goal setting needs a rebrand as much as strategy does, in that what you're saying is by setting the goal, you're falling in love with the process and the journey and the adventure. But the way we set goals is kind of dumb, right? Because we set for example, let's talk about food and drink. So I wrote about this in my newsletter the other day. So standard brand are sort of standard brand, but you know, I've asked this with Islands who I'm working now. It's quite a rote unimaginative way of setting a goal. It's like, right, I want to drive the rate of sale to 9, right, in Sainsbury's. And it's a statement-led goal. So it's like, we are going to drive the rate of sale to 9. How? That's basically how most goals are set. You've got John Doerr's OKRs, which I don't want to talk about that because I think that's a load of shit, which just convolutes brands. But actually, a better way to do it is to create question-led goals. So if you sit there and say, a bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger, how am I going to be the best bodybuilder in the world? How am I going to be the best governor in the world? Or Alex Smith, how am I going to be the solo consultant who makes 10 million quid a year? It's a question that then leads to the goal. And when you ask a question-led goal, if this makes sense, it unlocks imagination. So to pull this into food and drink, Trip, the CBD drinks brand, they did a partnership with Calm, the meditation app. I don't know if they actually did this, but it's just an illustrative point. They, instead of saying, how do we drive the rate of sale and get more consumers to Sainsbury's, that's quite a rote statement-led goal. They asked the question, which was, how can we do something that no one else has done before that's going to attract a brand new consumer base? And they've done this partnership with Calm, who's the huge meditation brand. It's gone all over Waterloo. And it's a flight of imagination. But the way you get the flight of imagination is by setting goals which are question-led, if that makes sense. So asking yourself questions and then, whereas I think the reason every business has such a boring kind of what's the word, like almost like mechanical way of setting goals, which going back to what you're saying is zooming in. We're zooming in on goals, and actually what we need to do is zoom out. And the only way to have set zoom out goals, I know this may sound really airy fairy, but you've got to ask these big questions, and then that will allow the imagination. I don't know what you think on that.
Well, do you see that all we're talking about, but we're just not using the language, is that you're talking about the difference between strategy and tactics, and that's the irony, because it's the difference between you're sort of, okay, I want to push my rate of sale to 9 or whatever, like that is a tactical goal, but the other stuff you were talking about with Trip or Arnold stuff or whatever, it's a strategic goal. And what that means, the simple difference between those two things, is that one of them sets the macro direction for the entire business, or if you're a person, it sets the macro direction for your life. And the other one is a micro thing over, okay, what in the short, medium term am I going to do to turn this one dial? So, ROS to 9, lose 20 pounds. These are both tactical goals, and they both require tactical thinking. But whether it's, introduce the world to the power of CBD or become the world's best bodybuilder or whatever, these are not tactical, these are strategic, because you need to shift the whole business or your whole life as this one block in order to do that. The entire system, taking it back to your systems point, your Rory Sutherland point, the whole system gets organized to do that. So, Trip, for sake of argument, might have to organize the whole system to achieve this giant goal, in the same way as Arnold has to organize his whole life in order to achieve his goal. And so, that is, it's interesting because, you talk about the dirty, polluted nature of words like strategy and tactics and all of that, and means nothing, and it sets people wrong. This is where it becomes interesting, because you can start talking about something which, on the face of it, is a completely different topic, but actually, brackets, really, it's exactly the same topic, but because you're re-articulating it, you're opening it up to a new set of people. Oh, we got a fly on the camera, look at that. You're opening it up to a new set of people, and you're making it accessible to people who, for whatever reason, were just not into the subject before. The fact of the matter is, absolutely every person on the planet could be into this subject, the only thing that defines that is what language we use to talk about it.
And this is the issue I have with OKRs and tactic. I basically think let's zoom out. Most brands, and I've been, hold my hands up, I've zoomed in too much and looked at the tactical led stuff without zooming out. And by setting these objective key results and setting these, which is like, for listeners, it's a methodology of setting goals, and then it's by John Dewar, the guy who did Google. So he's done something right. I can't. Who am I to sit here and say it does definitely work? But there's we masturbate over this tactic led strategy because it makes us feel like we're doing something, and actually, if we were to zoom out, what's the point of setting loads of objectives and key results to get good at tennis if actually you were to zoom out and ask yourself, what do I actually want to do? And you want to go rock climbing, right? Do you know what I mean? It's, as a business, you could want to do something completely different, but by getting pulled into the weeds of, right, we'll just do this little thing and we'll measure it at 3 months. I'm going to give it a red, like it's a fucking traffic light, yellow or green. Do you know what I mean? You get so pulled into this myopic way of thinking, and it takes, back to your point, these wholehearted or whole system rejigs. I think the way to get that is to ask questions, is to ask really crazy questions that may seem dumb, but actually pave the way forward. So you've written this book, and when this goes live, the book will go live, and I've read it, and it's sick, and it's concise, which I love, because a lot of books, they basically write their thesis in 100 pages and then add a load of fluff around the outside to make it look bigger and want its own shelf, which is a load of bollocks. Yours is short, snappy, concise, and I just love your floaty, lucid writing style. But the book's called Bullshit Strategy. So we've talked about zooming out.
No bullshit strategy.
Oh, sorry, mate.
I mean, you could frame it both ways, as long as it's all about the thing that we're tackling, not about the thing we're making.
Yeah, How to Create a Bullshit Strategy by Alex Smith.
You could use it like that. I think it would kind of work.
So no bullshit strategy. So let's define bullshit strategy first.
So I had kind of double meaning for this. So if you think about it in terms of no bullshit strategy, okay, firstly, we're saying we don't want any bullshit strategy. So strategy that is bullshit. And obviously most stuff that has the word strategy attached to it, like we talked about before, it is bullshit. And even if you think about the actual literal definition of bullshit, I don't just use that word because, here's a kind of punchy word for bad. I actually mean it on a sort of technical level, because the definition of bullshit is essentially a bunch of fancy verbiage that kind of sounds good, but in reality means nothing and does nothing. That, I think, is how most people either, whether they sort of say it out loud or not, I think that's how most people think about strategy. They're like, I think the attitude that people have towards it is, oh, yes, very good. That's our strategy. Okay, God, now just tell me what we're really doing. There's this separation between the floaty nonsense world of strategy and then the real business that actually happens underneath it, away from all of those highfalutin conversations. So that is clearly something that I want to take out of strategy. I want to take it away from this idea that it's something which is sort of high-minded and seems clever, but really isn't practical. Okay? Ultimately, strategy has got only one job, and that is to make you act. That is it. In fact, you talked about the word execution versus strategy before. Like, all strategy is execution, because the only reason you're doing the strategy is to execute. So the actual thing that you're doing when you do strategy is you are saying, we are going to execute this, this, and this, right? So the strategy part is actually just a means to an end. I could have called it no bullshit execution if you're actually thinking about the thing that we're actually trying to produce here with this book. So that's the first thing, how can you make a strategy that actually works, that actually does something that people in your team actually understand, and actually puts a fire in their belly and makes them say, hell yeah, let's go do this. That's that is what a strategy needs to do. And the other side of the equation was thinking about it in terms of the way that I write about it, I suppose. So no bullshit strategy. So like writing about it in a no bullshit way. Now, I don't mean to say that the other classic strategy books, the best-selling strategy books, are bullshit in terms of content, because they're anything but that. They got great content. They've and the people, the sort of like the big corporate Harvard MBA strategy dons, they know a lot more than me about strategy, and they've done this for bloody, Halliburton and Coca-Cola or whatever, etc., etc. They know what they're talking about, but they don't talk about it in a way which ultimately people want to read and which ultimately gets people excited. And they don't talk about it in a way which my clients, I think, particularly would chime with. And by my clients, I mean young founders and entrepreneurs running, in particular, consumer brands. So, I do think that if you're in the boardroom of General Electric with all of your MBA people around you and all that type of thing, I do think those people are engaging with sort of high corporate strategy. But most businesses aren't that, and I don't actually think necessarily that if you're, let's say, founder of, one of the type of brands that listens to Hungry, how much value is there really in it for you to hear about some successful strategy that a pig iron conglomerate in Peru did in 1972 or something? Obviously the fundamentals are the same, but we need to make this accessible and relevant to people. So that's the other thing that I'm trying to achieve with it.
Which you're doing, and the LinkedIn virality is insane. So congrats on that, and we will dig into the tactics and zoom in of that shortly.
Yeah.
But one of the posts that did really well, I think it was how to actually write a strategy document. And there'll be people listening to this who have a challenger brand in a crowded category 9 times out of 10, who may need to zoom out, take a step back from the day to day and actually write a strategy document to escape competition, to be the Land Rover that goes onto the beach and escapes the motorway, right? So you've divided it into 4 sections. So you've got the strategy argument, the strategy statement, the implications, and the execution flow. Do you want to kind of take us through those? I think that'd be really helpful for listeners.
Yeah, sure. I mean, clearly people do find it helpful because that was the one post that just that kind of blew up in a crazy way. So
how many people viewed that post?
I don't know, 1.5 million.
Fucking hell. That's sick. That's amazing, mate.
I mean, obviously, I've been doing other posts and stuff, but, I think that post, out of the 26,000 followers that I've added in the last 2 weeks, pretty confident that at least 24,000 of them are from that one post, and all the other stuff can kind of jog on. But we'll see if I keep up the momentum now. So one thing, the reason I wrote that post, and that is actually kind of like it's a condensed version of a chapter in the book. So the book obviously talks about the same thing, but like in a more long-winded, detailed way. The reason I wrote it is because a lot of clients ask me, when we're talking about, okay, let's do a strategy project, they're like, okay, well, I sort of understand what strategy is, but what do I actually get? Like, what are you going to hand me at the end of the project? And it's a good question because, I do think that, people, it's very important that people think about strategy as being a thing, like this literal item, effectively, that you can hold in your hand and that you can use, that just sort of grounds it. So is it a 100-slide deck? Is it a sort of a pyramid or an onion or whatever, that kind of thing? Like, what actually is it? Now, obviously, I guess there are lots of different formats, so I can only talk about the way that I do it. And the way that I do it is, it's a Word document, first and foremost, keeping it basic. So not slides, a actual piece of prose, like a little essay almost. And the purpose of that essay is effectively to state the case, state the argument for what your strategy is and why you think it will work. So I think about it very, very similarly to if you watch like a legal TV show and the lawyer is giving his closing statement to the jury. And he's like, and that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is why you must conclude that our client is not guilty or whatever. It's exactly the same kind of vibe as that you're putting across. So it's like, and that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is why you must conclude that this is a great bloody idea. So that is why then you have as the core part of the document what I call the strategy argument, because a strategy is an argument. You've literally got to sit down and type out longhand, as if you're sending it to someone in an email. Well, because of this thing, and this thing, we think that if we do this thing, then this thing might happen. So when you write a piece of prose like that, and you don't have to be an amazing writer. If you can write an email, then you can write this. But the beauty of this format is that prose doesn't tolerate any bullshit. You can hide a lot of crap in slides, and that's why people love to use slides to do all sorts of things in business. And that's why PowerPoint is used like 10 times more than Word. But the much harsher taskmaster is Word, is when you write something like a little essay. If you're talking nonsense, you're not going to be able to write this. Okay, so it's a great format to lay out the strategy. So a little bit of background at the top. We are such and such a company. The current market looks like this. Here's our situation. What are we going to do about it? Then you get into the argument where you're going to drop, the thing that you've realized, the sort of insight that you have. Another nice way of thinking about that, I think. I think this is a better word than insight because people get it more intuitively. Is, although it sounds a bit silly, what secret have you found out? Right? An insight and a secret are kind of the same thing. In both cases, they're just like, here's a thing that we've noticed or a thing that we know about the market, which the other guy doesn't know. So that is an insight, but maybe it's easier to think of it as secret.
How do you find that secret? Because not playing devil's advocate, but playing the dumb layman in the room or online, is you go out and you look at the market and you create this strategy, or start writing this kind of prose saying this is the market, but finding that secret isn't always the easiest thing. Do you know what I mean? Like how do people find the secret?
That is clearly the hard thing, and that is the central kind of nucleus of the whole strategy process. So let me look back to that in a second. I'll just finish like what the strategy document is, just to close that loop, which is that you write it down, you say, therefore, we're going to go and do X. So your strategy is this practical thing that you're going to go and do, that you're going to go and offer. Then you just wrap it up with a sentence or two. The strategy is da-da-da. And then, most importantly, you've got the bits where you say, this is what this means for product. This is how we're going to change the product. This is how we're going to change the brand. This is what it means for how we should do distribution. This is what it means for how we should, what our angle is to pitch for retailers, etc., etc. All of that, all those actions should spill out of the strategy if the strategy was practical. And all of those actions ultimately then represent your plan, the thing that, okay, over the next 6 months, we know what we need to do. We need to do these things. And once we've done them, we will be in this new strategic version of the business, which in principle should be boom, rocketing up. So that's the document. But yes, the nub of all of it is, like you say, how do you find the insight, the secret, the thing that unlocks everything else? And a lot of the book is focused on obviously the stuff around this, like what is strategy, how do you write it, how do you execute it, how do you tell if something is a good strategy or a bad strategy. This is all surrounding stuff that makes you understand the concept and helps you shape your thinking into something which is a functional strategy. But there's always that little leap in the middle, which is actually coming up with a fucking good idea. And that's where there's a little bit of sort of magic and, you know, a little bit of the more kind of esoteric, hard to systematize part of the process. Now, although I do think it is hard to systematize, and there is no like, you know, I can give you a formula for how to write a strategy document, for example. That's just like fill in this template, right? I cannot give you a formula for coming up with the insight which the strategy hinges on, because it's always done in a different way for every single project. But what I can do is give you some sort of games or thought experiments that might dig it out. And one useful thing to understand about this is that the insight that you're looking for, it is never or almost never a new piece of information. It's never a stat or a fact or something that you can sort of necessarily find out by research. You basically have to assume that in terms of just raw information, you and your competitors, you all are working off the same information. You're working off the same basic facts. What gives you an advantage is not the information, it's the way that you look at the information. Like, it's something that the way that I like to talk about it is, it's not about what you know, it's about what you notice. So, you know, two people can be looking at the same information, the same business, but one of them will look at it from a weird angle and they'll see something that other people haven't seen before. So I'll give you an example. Well, with my business, right? So I was thinking about, you know, like articulating my strategy the other day. And so what is the insight that I have in my business, which other sort of strategy practitioners don't have? And it's a good example, I think, of how it's something which, once I say it, it's totally obvious and everyone would agree with it and everyone knows it, but it just so happens that other people haven't thought about it. So that's it. And in my case, it's because, like I said, people think that strategy is about figuring out what you're going to do, what actions you're going to take. But when you think about it, there are two parts to decide to taking effective action. Part number one is deciding what is the right thing to do. What would be something we could do that would be effective versus something that is ineffective. Every single person worth their salt who talks about strategy on the planet knows that strategy is about figuring out what the right thing to do is. So that's obvious. But if you think about it, there is actually another equally important part of the equation here, which no other strategy people, as far as I can tell, think about, which is that it's not just about what you do, but it's also about motivating people to do it. So you could tell your team, or you could tell a business, you know, the most sensible strategy in the whole world, and if you do this, then it will be effective. But if they don't actually go out there and bloody execute, and if they don't go out there and execute with passion and intensity, it won't do anything. Like, strategy is a motivational discipline just as much as it is a discipline about what being right or wrong. So a strategy also has a responsibility to entertain and to get people pumped up and to get them inspired and to get the blood flowing. The more that a strategy inspires people and gets them excited, the more hard they will execute and the more effective the strategy will be. If you do a strategy that is only focused on being right, but not on being sort of passionate, then it doesn't matter how right it is, because there's going to be shit execution, and so you're never going to see the results. So you see that there's this sort of hidden aspect of strategy, which is very obvious, which other people who talk strategy aren't folding into their stuff. So I am folding it into my stuff, which makes me deliver things in a different style and a different way and sort of put emphasis on different parts of the process than what other people are doing. So it's a long-winded way of saying that is an insight, right? It's something that is super obvious and doesn't need any proof. I don't need to do any research or crunch any data to prove that this is true. It's just a different way of looking at something which everyone else is looking at. So you as a business, ultimately, the way that you're going to find that secret, that insight, that point of leverage, is just by looking at your market, your business, your competitors in a weird way that other people haven't looked at it before. And there are various kind of tricks and questions that you can ask in order to make that happen. So I've got a bunch of them in the book, obviously, but to give you just one example, a very, very basic example is you have to figure out where you disagree with your competitors. So where you can say, okay, all of my competitors think X, but we think Y. Now, most businesses, when they're honest, when they step back, they actually don't they don't disagree with their competitors at all. They and their competitors agree about every single bloody thing. We think that the environment's important. We think that taste is important. We think that customer service is important. Right? So there'll be no points of disagreement at all between the two businesses. But if you actually, if you were like, you know what, actually, we don't think the taste is important at all, for sake of argument. When you come up with that point of disagreement with your competitors, that then opens up leverage. And then you can start to think, okay, well, what can we do? Because we actually disagree with this thing, or we don't care about this thing, which our competitors can't do. What opportunity does that open up? So, there are a bunch of these kind of games that you can play, but most of them at any given time are not going to provide you with the answer. But at least it starts getting you thinking in the right way.
I think I read it on a comment on your LinkedIn where you said, and it's super astute, was asking how can we get consumers to love us is the question every brand asks. A question is how can we get consumers to hate us is just as good, because I think you need love and hate. Yeah. Love and hate are the same. Like generally, love and hate are the same thing. And I've kind of applied it to this podcast. Is that I know, and my newsletter, I know, and I can see it for the subscribers, I kind of want to piss people off. Or not want to piss people off, but I'm really okay with people unsubscribing. Like that really doesn't bother me, because I know I want it to be so Marmite that the people that love it so much that they tell all their friends. I want a small, sticky, strong community of growth versus a wishy-washy kind of community. And actually, this is the value of long form podcasts and written newsletter. I know you write newsletters, because I was listening to a podcast before we came live today, and this guy got James Smith, who's a fitness influencer. He's done this whole thing, love versus hate, right? Fitness before James Smith was very it's like bit like basically people kind of rip off Arnold Schwarzenegger, like super hench geezers and girls. Very, very nice. We're all on the same page. This guy comes in, he's kind of like the Gordon Ramsay of fitness, swears like no end. So many people hate him. I actually used to hate him. I actually think he's hilarious now. Is super on the knife edge. But by doing that, he doesn't care, and he's actually attracted diehard fans. But what he was saying is this is kind of going a bit tangential here, but his Instagram following went up by 1 million because he's got these Instagram reels and TikTok, whatever. But his actual sales didn't move at all. And that's why he's gone into newsletters and longer form podcasts, because it's not as big a community. It's a much smaller community, but it's a much stickier community. And I think what people and brands want to do, and even just content creators, is they want to hop on board with the new TikTok, hop on board with the new marketing strategy, marketing craze, to throw the net out really wide. But there's no point in having a really wide net where everyone kind of likes you, because there won't be many fucking fish in that sea, right? You're much better having a smaller net where some people hate you, some people love you, but the ones that love you are in that net. And I think there's a great lesson in that for founders who are listening to this. Like, how can we actually get people to hate us? And I think it's there's so many examples of that. I think he's a great example. I think in terms of restaurants, I mean, there's a restaurant called sorry, there's a cake brand up north called Get Baked. And if you look at most cake brands, they are Mumsy Dumsy, Fortnum and Mason, Harrods Cake, or Colin the Caterpillar Cake. This guy, he's based up in Leeds. He's created this cake called Bruce, this chocolate fudge cake that's like that. He says, he basically goes, I make a living telling my customers to fuck off. And it's hilarious. The copy on his Instagram's amazing. He literally retweets everyone that hates him. But he's got people like me who love him so much that they're willing to talk about him like I'm talking to him about you now, Alex. And I think being on the knife edge of love and hate is the same thing. It's a real unfair advantage. It just takes bollocks to actually do that. In terms of... Yeah, go on, mate.
Oh, no, I completely agree. And so that is just another example of a game that you can play to look at your business from a different angle and dig these things out. And, and don't want to give the impression that it's all about being bolshy or kind of liquid deathy. That is, some brands, a lot of great brands, they are a bit bolshy in some respect, but there is also like, I won't labour the point, but another simple game is position your business against a completely different foreign product category. So one of the greatest strategic brands of all time, as everyone knows, is Southwest Airlines. They invented the low-cost airline category. How did they do that? Long story short, they thought, what if our competitor isn't American Airlines? What if our competitor is buses? How would we do things differently if we were only trying to compete with buses and never mind about American Airlines? Then comes a whole cascade of innovations, which ultimately results in an amazing thing. So again, another little game. So a whole bunch of these games, and these games are fundamentally the way that you dig out the insight.
It's like alcohol free as well in some respects. It's maybe a bit more of a tactic, but alcohol free. Yes, they're competing against traditional booze, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, sometimes Thursday. But actually, there's a whole nother opportunity. And I think we talked about this last time, but not with alcohol-free as an example of unlocking the dormant market. Whereas in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, people are going for lunch. They're going for lunches in the city. They're doing business meetings. There's a whole opportunity there to have Lucky Saint or other brand there. But it's as you say, you've got our main competitor here, whether that's buses for Southwest Airlines, whether that's Heineken for Lucky Saint. But then actually we're also competing some other parts of the week against Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, water. I'll have Lucky Saints loads of times in the week just to... it just makes the lunch slightly better. In terms of going viral, and you wrote a post about how to do that. What, if we could boil it down into to the three levers or two levers that really had this like almost pandemonium like lift off for your content, what would you say it is? Because I think you talked something about stacking content together. Yeah. What's that about?
Well, the first thing I just want to caveat is that the stuff that I talked about was my sort of own personal innovations, but obviously I piled those innovations on top of a ton of best practice, which I won't go into because you can get it from lots of different places. But there are
what are some of the best practices? Sorry, I'm just asking this.
Oh, so if you like,
I don't really follow any of that stuff. I just write it, but I probably could learn a thing or two. Like,
yeah, I mean, I thought it was really important for me just to kind of get the basics covered off. So if you look at someone like Justin Welsh, he's the sort of like the stock LinkedIn guru. And he's got these online courses, and they're very simple, and they just go through a whole bunch of stuff, like how to just get your profile in shape, really, really super basic stuff. But ultimately, you need to do it. And, even like that, it's more sophisticated than this, but it's like the optimal amount of times to post is once a day, every weekday, or, make sure that your posts have a hook. There's all of this sort of pretty basic stuff. I say basic, but like most people who are trying to play the game aren't doing it. But
yeah, so does that, because everyone's on this carousel craze at the minute,
Yeah.
And this, at the end of each post, it's like, if you like it, reshare it, repost it or something. Does that actually work, or is that just everyone doing? Because everyone seems to be doing that now. I see on LinkedIn.
Well, I think they're just ripping me off there because I was pushing that one. I thought I was quite innovative with that particular little bit, but the carousels do fundamentally perform better for whatever algorithmic reason, which is a bit annoying because they're more labor. But then, of course, LinkedIn wants to have higher quality content, so I guess it kind of makes sense. So that's the main thing, the main reason why you're seeing the carousels. The carousels also you can put a big fat call to action at the end of them, which is harder to do in a text post or something. So I think those are the main things with the carousels. Now, so there's, again, this is a lot of the just sort of like basic. I say basic, but a lot of people don't know it. I just don't want to, I don't want to like sort of like waste everyone's time telling you a whole bunch of LinkedIn when number one, I'm not an expert, and number two, you can get them from loads of other better sources than me. But my personal...
So sorry, mate, to interrupt, but like, no, you're not wasting people's time. Sometimes the basics is the important things. Just if you rattle them off, you don't even have to go into them. So it's like the hook. I
mean, the basic stuff that I think mattered, which I didn't invent, I just sort of learned, was, okay, number one, get your profile in the right shape. Number
what
two,
does that look like?
Oh, it's a whole bunch of boring stuff, like turn on creator mode and like make sure that you have a good sort of banner image and put some links in your featured section and, kind of housekeeping type things, which I don't actually know if LinkedIn, if the algorithm cares about that stuff, but obviously you're trying to pull people through to your profile and then you want to give them a good, smooth experience when they're on the profile. There's a whole bunch of stuff about that little headline that you put beneath your name where you say, founder of the Hungry podcast or whatever it is you say. So there's a whole sort of like theory about good things to put there, which I can't really remember much of the nuggets, but the basic gist of it is you kind of want to say what problem you solve for people there. So these kind of lots of these sort of like housekeeping, getting the foundations in order stuff. Then you come onto your content. Now, yeah, you're right. I mean, I say this like it's all obvious. I suppose it isn't necessarily obvious to people. Next thing, when you're going to start making content, you obviously need to know, well, what do I write about? And which is really means what value am I giving to people? Why the hell should anybody follow me? So, again, classic, what problem am I solving? What benefit are they going to get from it? What are the different kind of pillars within the problem that I solve, which I can write content about? And whereas you could get very, very formal and laborious when it comes to mapping out your different types of content that you put out there and the different subjects that you talk about. And for most people, that would probably be a good idea, because if you can't just come up with killer content off the top of your head, then you should probably systematize it. So again, like I say, I don't do this, so I don't really know much about it, but you might say, for sake of argument, okay, I'm Dan, I give useful tips for FMCG founders. Therefore, there are 5 pillars under which FMCG founders worry about. There's marketing, there's team, there's fundraising, there's something else, supply chain, I don't know. And then you're like, here are my 5 opinions under each one of these pillars. So I think marketing should be done like this. I think that fundraising should be done like this. And then each one of those 5 opinions, I can write that 5 different ways. So that's 5 times 5 is 25 times 5 is 125. So you got 125 posts there in theory. So that is the sort of formal way where then you're like, okay, this is all the stuff that I talk about, and now I can kind of put it out there. Probably use a scheduler to do that. Most people do, although I've stopped doing that.
How come?
I believe, although everybody would disagree with me, but it's just my personal experience, that the posts perform worse when they go out there with a scheduler. I think that there's something in the LinkedIn algorithm that this is just pure conspiracy theory, I've got no proof, that favors you if LinkedIn sees you dicking about on the platform for 5 minutes before posting. Whereas if you post in absentia with a scheduler, I don't think it performs as well. So I'm probably just paranoid about that. But now I don't use a scheduler. Actually, funnily enough,
What scheduler were you using?
First I used Social Champ because it was a free one. Then I switched on to Taplio, which is a much more sophisticated one because Taplio could do carousels and Social Champ couldn't. But I think Social Champ can do carousels now. And it's got a whole bunch of other kind of like functionality which other people might find useful, but I think are kind of nonsense, like getting AI to write content for you and stuff like that. So it's got loads of like pretty sophisticated functionality, but I was just using it as a basic scheduler. So then I was doing one post a week, and obviously I know, well, I'm improving it all the time, but I knew the general stuff that I wrote about. And then this is now getting into slightly more insightful territory, I think. So you've probably seen that famous Jack Butcher visualize value image where it has kind of like a flat line going along with no results, and then the little quote saying, "This is pointless." And then after that, it suddenly booms. And the moral of the story is, if you keep on going long enough, eventually it'll compound and you'll break through. And in my case, my graphs did look exactly like that. So I had 6 months of like pretty flat nothingness, and then suddenly overnight, kaboom, like a rocket ship. But I think that graph and that principle, although it's valuable in one sense, in that, yes, you do need to keep on turning up, fine, I get that. But I think it's really misleading because it implies that if you just keep doing the same thing and you keep on trying, eventually you're going to break through. And that isn't true. I genuinely think that you could keep on pumping out crap for literally years and you'll never ever break through because you're not producing something that people want to see. So although I did have 6 months of like sort of not unsuccessful posting, but not anything special, I wasn't just kind of plodding along and waiting to win the lottery. I was doing an intense amount of thought and consideration over what worked, what didn't, improving the quality of my writing, improving the quality of the hooks, the headlines, all that stuff. And so one tool which I use a lot is a analytics tool called Shield, which is just like LinkedIn analytics, but it stores all of your posts and it tells you, I mean, it's mostly information that you can actually get natively on LinkedIn. It's just a bit of a more convenient format. So you can just look back on it and you can just sort all your posts by which posts got the most impressions, which posts got the most likes. And then you can look at them and say, okay, well, what do these posts have in common that the crap ones didn't? And then, you're starting to build and build and build. So, I was sort of like,
What sort just...
yeah.
What was in common with the crap posts and what was in common with the good posts? Because I mean, to be honest, I probably should do all this stuff. I don't. I just kind of just write what's in my head and then just throw it out there if it works. But yeah, what was good about the good posts? What was bad about the bad posts?
Good about the good posts. So I'm sorry to say that clickbaity stuff really does work. I mean, there's good clickbait and there's bad clickbait, but to me, it's still all kind of like clickbait where you're saying something like, the unbelievable secret behind the Elon Musk's that kind of stuff. And the reason that it works is because it forces people to click that see more thing and go on to the next line. And then LinkedIn loves it if someone clicks that see more thing. And so then that gets it sent to more people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that first line has got to make people read the second line, and the second line has got to make people read the third line. Again, these are sort of classic lessons which anyone will tell you, but it's still very hard to get the knack of doing it. Whereas what I see a lot of on LinkedIn and what I was doing a lot before is that people like to just sort of come out with opinions that they have. And the opinions actually can be really, really interesting, but they don't have that FOMO factor, right? They don't have that feeling of like, oh, I need to hear this. So it's quite successful to make some sort of big, bold, contrarian opinion, like I don't know, like people think that I can't even think of what a contrarian opinion would be.
But I know what you mean. So like, because I've looked into this. So I'm going in on YouTube with this podcast, as I'm a bit late to the party, but podcasts, 30% of podcasts now found on YouTube. That YouTube have just created but it's owned by Google, so it's a search engine. But what I've been learning and researching a lot into is how important the hook is. The hook's more important on YouTube than it is on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, people are accustomed to written. It's a more written format. You've got longer to play with, and actually, you're in your own pocket of an industry. So we're in the challenger brand space, so it's easier to build in that niche. Whereas on YouTube, it's a fucking free for all. It's mad. But this guy's got this thing about great hooks, which is negative, and this is what pisses me off, but I'm kind of having to put my ego aside and use them. But like, negative hooks work. So if you say the top 10 mistakes Minor Figures made when trying to build Minor Figures is better than the 10 lessons Minor Figures had when they build it. Words like actually work. So how to actually win.
I always use the actually. It's absolutely
win a Waitrose listing versus how to win a Waitrose listing. The biggest mistakes you're making will do better than like this is how to do it well. So as fucking annoying it is, negativity works with hooks. What are some of the hooks that have performed really well for you?
How I ... is always a winner. People love any how thing. It's pretty basic.
The thing is, mate, you're saying this is basic, but it's not. It's just, you know, I think it's because you're so engulfed into it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not basic. It's common if you've been looking into this stuff, which I have. So I feel like these are all like cliches, not worth mentioning. But that's because I've been studying this stuff. If you hadn't been studying this stuff, then they aren't. Then it's completely different. So
also, cliche is cliche for a reason. I always say.
Damn right. So how I ... anything around sort of secret or hidden. So I had a good post that was the secret process of expert thinkers that succeeded well for obvious reasons. A much more subtle one. This isn't a hook, but it's something I've really noticed that people bloody love any post where they can say, "I feel seen." Right? I get that comment with quite a lot with the best posts where you say,
"I feel seen."
Yeah, so where somebody feels like you've articulated something that they do or they think and they felt a bit ashamed about, and you're saying, you know what, actually this is the right thing to think or the right way to do it or whatever. So people love a bit of solidarity. This is why this is a real practical and challenging point. It's very easy to build an audience of your peers where all of your posts are applause lines. So, for example, let's say you're a founder of a Hungary style brand, and then you can do a whole bunch of posts that are like, here's what sucks about pitching to retailers or something, and then all of the other founders are going to be like, bravo, God, yeah, doesn't it suck, da 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 da, and you're going to build that audience. Or maybe you're a copywriter in an ad agency, and you can do posts that are going to be like, don't you just hate it when account handlers give you a crap brief, and that's such an easy audience to grow. Any peer thing, people bloody love, because it basically, to this being seen point, everyone's sort of slapping each other's back and sort of like commiserating with each other about how bad their life is or whatever. The problem with that is that there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, you aren't selling to peers. You're selling to a different party. So I'm not selling to other strategists. I'm selling to founders, chief execs. If you're a founder, you're not selling to other founders. You're selling to investors or to retailers or whatever. So it's much harder game to do content that's going to build your audience with potential customers. And of course, we got to stop and think, why the hell are we doing this? Maybe you're doing it because you just love the validation, and I wouldn't blame you, because who doesn't love the validation? But if you're just getting applause lines from peers, then it's not without value, because you are building reputation within your industry and things like that. But it's not a super easy to commercialize audience that you're building. Like, if you were to use the example of founders, if you were some amazing bloody founder in the FMCG space who somehow managed to be followed by every buyer and every investor in the industry, then you'd be laughing, wouldn't you? But you're not gonna achieve that by posting like, here's why it's shit to be a founder, or here's why it's fun to be a founder, or anything which is basically targeted at other founders, which is unfortunately what you're going to get a lot of positive feedback on. And then you'll start doing more of that, but you've got to step back and say, why am I doing this?
I love that, because LinkedIn can be a self-congratulating carousel of crap, to be honest. And it's really interesting. So I wrote a post about the issue with data for brands, and I basically said, I used the analogy of football, and I said, people are, oh, I got a bit of stick saying, oh my God, you're so anti-data, you're so anti-data. I said, I'm not anti-data. I said, it's like football. You need to use data as defense as a brand. Data will tell you, when say it's a listing in Waitrose or Sainsbury's, data will tell you availability, data will tell you your rate of sale, data will tell you the stores that are doing well that may need some love, the stores that are doing crap that will need some extra love. But the issue so that's your defense. You have to have data to defend. But using data to attack, i.e. innovate, is really dumb, because every brand is looking at the same data, which means you get the same inputs, as we were talking about earlier, which means you get the same outputs. That's why every protein bar looks the same. That's why RTD cocktails are beginning to look the same. Looking at the same data, using data to innovate is really dumb, but not using data to defend is also really dumb. And I basically said, imagine putting Harry Kane in goal. That would be pretty dumb, and putting Jordan Pickford up top, right? That was basically my analogy. It got 6 likes, so no one liked it, and maybe about 400 views. Maybe more than that, 500 views. But 2 data companies read that post, reached out to me, and I had a call with them about them sponsoring this podcast, because they do data for challenger brands. So the point is yes, you can have all this self-congratulatory stuff, but you can also, I suppose, as a content creator, and I love creating content. That's what I just love doing it. Is you can actually be really strategic, and that's why I think as a brand you can almost say, one of the things I'm writing on my newsletter, which is, no wonder back to the negative, no wonder your buyer is ghosting you, you donut, do this instead. Or it may be no wonder your buyer is ghosting you, you muppet, do this instead. But I know that will get a lot of buyers, which is great for the agency side of the business. But it's fascinating. But I think what I want to basically, I feel like a dog getting pulled in by his owner, because I've just meandered off into the wilderness. But I want to go back to this. You're talking about the kind of the self-congratulatory stuff, but what's this tactic, if you want to call it that, of stacking content together? Because I think that's fascinating. And why did that work, do you think?
Yeah, so I talked about the stuff that I was doing for 6 months and just sort of learning the craft. So park all of that. Now this is the stuff that, as far as I can tell, took me from 0 to 1 and made it blow up, which of course is laid on top of all of the fundamentals. So the first thing that I noticed and the problem that I had was it's chicken and egg problem. If you got no followers, how the hell do you grow? Because you're not getting any exposure. So you put out a piece of gold. And I definitely think that I put out, the odd, really great
You did,
objective
you definitely did.
post
You did, yeah.
back in the day, but it wasn't like blowing up. And because, of course, it's only being surfaced to a small number of people, even if its engagement rates are huge. And obviously on my sort of analytics, it tells me the engagement rates. And some of these posts, I'm like, wow, that's great engagement, but why isn't LinkedIn pushing it? So my theory, and again, maybe someone who actually really understands LinkedIn would tell me this is bollocks, but I think it worked. My theory was that when LinkedIn decides who to surface your posts to, number one, obviously they'll surface them to people who follow you or a proportion of people who follow you. Number two, it will surface them to people who engaged with your last post. So by that logic, I thought, well, if I put, let's say, 5 pieces of A-grade content, the best thing that I can do, back to back to back, then there'll be a compounding sort of snowball effect where the first post will perform well by my standards, but nothing special. But then I immediately follow it. By immediately, I mean the next day. So I'm saying each of these is 1 day apart. I immediately follow it with another A-grade post, which then gets sent to my followers, but it also gets sent to the people who engaged with my last post, which is obviously, a slightly different pool than my followers. And then I do it again, and so each post is getting higher exposure than the one that came before it because they're feeding off the post that came before. So this is what I did, and sure enough, each post started going up and up and up. So my first post was a good performer, but within the realms of normality for me. So let's call it 50 likes, something like that. The next post was, let's say, 150 likes, which would be not unheard of for me, but unusual. Next post was like 400 likes. Wow, amazing, record breaker. And then the next post was 8,000 likes, 1.5 million impressions, and all the rest of it. So that was the dam broke. Now, obviously, what the actual posts were had something to do with this, and I'm not saying that if I'd changed the order of the posts and the viral one had been the first one, the whole system might not have worked. So I wasn't clever enough to I didn't plan the order thinking, oh, that will be the one that goes through. I wasn't like that clever. But I did think that this kind of like intensity of quality content was responsible for me finally fixing the chicken and egg problem. Now, of course, the issue with it is that it's incredibly laborious to churn out that content because, these are higher quality posts, so they're higher effort posts. And now I've set a bit of a precedent, which is quite hard for me to keep up with. But, so far I'm just riding the train and going to see where it takes me. But that was, that was my kind of, my compounding insight.
I love it. And I need to do that because I'm so scatty with my content. I may get that shield thing and look at what's done well and then just... Because I suppose what I can do is I've got content that's been written like years ago, so I can just repurpose it. But I may stack them back to back to back to back and then do videos of the top 5 performing guests. So it's the 80-20 rule. Stack that back to back to back to back and then...
I definitely recommend trying that. This then takes me on to the second sort of insight that I had, which doesn't really apply so much to video. Well, actually, it probably does apply to video if you sort of edit it right, which is this idea of restful content, which a lot of people seem to really chime with. And I do think it's another innovation that I brought in the same week that I did my compounding. So arguably it actually was more important than the compounding, I don't know. So I read this book, which I recommend, which is a sort of 1962 advertising copybook, How to Write a Good Advertisement. And it had this idea in it, and he talked about this idea of restful content, which I never heard before, which was basically saying any piece of copy needs to be done in such a way as that the eye rests on it. So rather than it having to be a little bit of work to read it, even if that's only like 1-2% work, it actually has to feel like the opposite of work. It has to feel like relaxation to read it. Another quote in the book is, "Great copy is easier to read than to skip," which I think is an amazing concept. The idea that like it's possible to write something which is literally lower effort to read than not to read. And if you think about it, that's true, because all day you see things which for whatever reason you just sort of read without even thinking about it. You read instinctively, not because you were like, oh, I should read this. You just read it. Anything like that is something where ultimately the path of least resistance was for you to read it as opposed for you to look away from it. So like, you know, the person can't help but read it. Now, so, you know, when they read the thing, it's like slipping into a warm bath. They're scrolling through that feed and they come to this thing and it's just like, and off they go and they just float. So then the question is, how do you do this? And so obviously it's a combination of the writing and the design, the layout. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, like I couldn't even necessarily break it all down. I just sort of like did a carousel. This is why the carousel format's good, because you can lay the content out in a way that is restful. Whereas if you just write a post, you can improve it. You can make it more restful, but you can't make it totally restful. So, I mean, all I would say is just go and look at my carousel posts, and that is restful content. And it's just like, it just, you know, slips down like a cool beer on a hot day is what I'm trying to do.
And also that's a point. That was one of the, you use lucid picture language. One of the guys who's been on the podcast, second episode, said there's 3 types of language. There's factual language, which is words like, ironically, strategy. There's words like corporate social responsibility. They're words for the head, but they don't really pierce the heart. The second level of language is sensory. So that is cold beer. That's sensory language. It's slightly more here. Then there's picture language, which is like the piece de resistance of language, which is like ice, face meltingly cold beer on a earth-scorchingly hot day. Like it's so... But you've inserted that language into your post, which I think is really sick. The other thing I want to talk about is this. I don't know if I've come up with it, but there's... What we talked about at the beginning is playing the infinite game versus finite games. Have you heard of that? Infinite versus finite games? Yeah. So infinite game basically means it's the game where you keep playing. And I think you and I are very lucky in that we just love what we do, so we can just keep playing. Like I've kept playing with this podcast. No one listened to it for 2 years, but I love doing it. It doesn't really matter. Same with your content, right? 6 months, people do it. But as long as you can keep playing, it doesn't matter. But to play this game, there has to be something called, I believe, in terms of content creator fit, a bit like product market fit. So product market fit is you hit product market fit and it kicks off. But content creative fit is, are you writing the content that you actually want to write? Because if you start writing or creating content because everyone else is doing it and you hate it, it becomes a finite game whereby you lose. So, for example, with TikTok and Instagram Reels, you're at the mercy of the algorithm right there. A bit like carousels are in the rage right now with LinkedIn, but you're at the mercy. So the value of a newsletter is you control that algorithm. There's no algorithm. And so what I suppose I'm trying to tease out with you here is, or for people listening, is just because every brand is saying go onto TikTok doesn't mean you should go onto TikTok. Like there's brands out there. I'm trying to think of a great example. The obvious example is Hyatt Denim, which David Hyatt's been on this brand. He's built his whole business around a newsletter. I think Perks somewhere behind me. He's written a book all about how to build a jeans brand off a newsletter. He could have gone into TikTok. He could have gone into Instagram Reels. He could have gone on to blog posts and this. But he found out what his content creator fit was. He found out what works for him and then executed on it. And I think what happens is so many founders and brands get pulled into, well, this is the new shiny toy. I'm going to go and do a bit of that. And then they hate doing it and they lose the game. Do you find... Because I've toyed with these carousel things, but I just think the idea of me sitting around trying to create them, I'd go fucking nuts. But do you think it's worth doing it, or what do you think?
No, I don't. I have a passionate belief that, how can I put it? What would be a nice, restful, snappy, copy way of putting it? You never achieve success through hard work. Because if something is hard work, you will never be good at it. You will always be bad at it. If we take it back to Arnold, for sake of argument, and him becoming hench, Arnold, he didn't work any harder on becoming a bodybuilding champion than you work on watching Netflix every night. Because for him, it was like his Netflix. It was just something that he got pleasure from doing. He just liked the game. He liked the process just as much as you like sitting down in front of Netflix. So, like, someone who hates watching Netflix would say, "Wow, you really work hard at watching Netflix, don't you?" But of course you don't. Because you're into it. So, you're only ever going to be able to win at something which feels like watching Netflix, that feels like play. The people who become amazing at playing the piano are people who really enjoy being shit at the piano. Now, if I learned to play the piano, I would find it very frustrating to be a really shit pianist. And that's why I will never, ever be great at the piano. But other people, they're loving every minute of plodding through chopsticks. So they'll become great pianists. So if you're looking at it and you're saying, this thing, carousels, whatever, do I have to do that? The answer is, not only do you not have to do it, you definitely should not do it. And more broadly, of course, okay, you and I both, one way or another, like producing content, but a lot of people don't like producing content of any shape or form. And, that's fine, because it's only one game. It's only one game to play. It's not the only game in town. There are plenty of phenomenally successful people out there who don't produce content. So I genuinely wouldn't bother. I wouldn't bother doing anything which doesn't give you some element of pleasure. You'll just waste your time. And yeah,
I think that's reassuring, and I think the point, I suppose, we're both trying to get to, we're on maybe different trains going to the same destination, but it's don't get blinded by the content and the hype that everyone's doing if it's not in your soul. So there's some brands who would write amazingly long form newsletters, but just because long form newsletters are not as cool as a TikTok with someone prancing around, it doesn't mean it's all a level playing field as long as it's the content you like to create. And this is why I love writing my newsletter, and it's a obtuse plug, but it is, and I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll put a link to your wonderful newsletter as well, mate. But what I think content's become on LinkedIn now is it's almost become like pop music. It's become Taylor Swift-ified. It's become Miley Cyrus-ified, whereby you kind of not your carousels. I think you're doing something truly remarkable there. But I mean, in general, you basically put a picture of you on the train after you've shat yourself, yeah, do you know what I mean? Or yeah, and then you have a few emojis. It's super short copy, and then that will get engagement. So that means every man and his dog's writing that content, and it's quite easy to get likes. And it goes back to that kind of appraisal stuff, which is great for the ego, but does it actually move the needle in the bank account? I don't agree. But why I love the newsletter is it almost allows you to submerge creatively. I don't know if you get this with your newsletter. I mean, I get it with the podcast, but obviously you can see how many people read your newsletter, and you can see how many people the open rate for sure. But that's it. So that means when I'm going into writing newsletter, is I've submerged myself through heavy dosages of techno, heavy dosages of coffee and vape, and I'm in this creative space where it feels like the content's coming out of my soul more than it is when I'm writing specifically for LinkedIn. I don't know if you find that with the way when you write your newsletter, but it allows me to pull. It's almost like if you were to compare a song by the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, and I'm not saying you and I, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, right? But versus something that's more kind of poppy. I feel like LinkedIn's becoming more like pop music, where you're losing that ability to create something that's really unique to you. Doesn't have to be great, just unique to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I could argue both ways. Basically, I agree with your point. However, the one caveat that I would put is that brutal algorithmic feedback that you get on LinkedIn, if you take it the right way and don't go down the sort of the bullshit rabbit hole, which of course easier said than done, it is a great writing coach, because the stuff that you're producing, including away from LinkedIn on your newsletter, let's say, ultimately you want to create stuff which people find value in, and you want to create stuff that people read, and you want to create stuff which resonates with people. Now, just doing what you want, I know that there's a certain artistic purity in like, I'll just write what I want and it'll land where it lands kind of thing, which was what I thought about with my newsletter for a long time. But then also I was like, well, if I'm not improving as a writer and being conscious of my audience, then it's actually kind of self-indulgent. And if I think that I've got something important to say, well, I'm not doing myself any favors, because I'm not putting it out there in a way where people are actually going to listen. About that clickbaity stuff, one of my pals said to me, look, don't think about it as clickbait. Think about it as that you're doing the reader a favor, because you're making them more likely to read your genius point, whatever it was. And I was like, yeah, that is a good point. So ultimately, for example, on my newsletter, my writing has probably become less free than it used to be, in a sense, in that I'm not just kind of like pontificating in a self-indulgent manner. But it's become more useful. And ultimately, any piece of writing or content creation or a bloody ad, let's say, it's a negotiation between you and the audience. If you let it all be audience, you're going to produce, like, you'll never guess what happened next, bollocks clickbait, which is completely empty and rots your soul. But if you let it be all you, it's going to be like a 3,000 word snore fest of a whole bunch of stuff that nobody cares about. So you got to have that negotiation. You got to let it be 50% them and 50% you. And LinkedIn, if you do it right, it forces you to think about them. And then you can pull that through into your newsletter, your book, whatever. And it's going to be better.
Fascinating nuance. How you'd started super self-indulgent and then and are now seeing this 50-50. It's like, what does the audience want? I'd gone it the other way around, where I'd started on LinkedIn. I've only started my newsletter this year, where I basically had a carbon copy of what would work. So it's like insert buyer, insert lessons from X brand, insert how to get a Waitrose listing. And I've got a short amount of space to write. So I would go into my creative process being like, right, it just needs to be short, snappy, here's the 4 points. And it almost became too mechanical and fucking boring. And I was like, okay, well, I know this is going to get likes. And so then with the newsletter, I was like, wow, I've just got free reign here. So I've almost approached it the other way around, where it's like I've gone from this super stringent, like this is kind of how to write. I've never gone viral, right? But it's like it's how to create content that's going to land. Boom, 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 boom. Carbon cookie cutter, cookie cutter. And as you say, that rotted my soul. And I think it is ultimately a balance. It's if you're writing stuff just to get likes, and it's not unique to your soul, it's a finite game and you'll lose. But if it's so self-indulgent, where you write a bit like I was talking about earlier, a sonnet about how trees have been here longer. I mean, does that really help a brand drive their rate of sale? In Sainsbury's, probably not. It's like, what you want about, mate? But it's an interesting place as someone who, well, we both create content.
I mean, you would know better than me. Oh, sorry, I don't want to knock you off your stride, but just to chuck it in there, you know, the great artists of the past, you know, like Leonardo da Vinci worked for wealthy patrons. You know, he was working for an audience. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, all of them, you know, they were commercial writers and I think were open about it. So, you know, art and audience are not enemies. They are together. And I think it's huge error to think otherwise.
Agree. But then to sort of to play a backhand back, I suppose, is Rick Rubin, who's do you know Rick Rubin, the music creator? Yeah. He did Red Hot Chili Peppers. He did, for listeners, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele. He did Johnny Cash. He did. He was the guy who put Run DMC and Aerosmith together. Just a creative genius. And his whole piece is the audience comes last. And ultimately, I think it's both. Like the audience comes last, so it's got to pour out your soul. But then it's a symbiotic relationship between you and your audience. But it's fascinating. So then, what I do want to talk about, and I know you said how it's got to feel like play, and it does. Creating stuff does feel like play. But there's a point when you hit resistance. Have you read this book, The War of Art? Have I told you about this book?
I have read it back in the day. But it was 10 years ago, so I can't really remember.
So like this book is like, I'm quite weird, but when I like prep for podcasts, I'll like literally kind of like touch it as to be like, we're going in, baby. I've read it so many times. It's covered in notes. It's just a great book. And basically the point is that it's going to get hard. Writing is going to get hard. Creating content is going to get hard. There have been days with this podcast where I'm like, I don't fancy doing it, or I don't fancy editing it, or I've got to work on a Sunday to edit it. And probably like you with the carousels, I don't really maybe not fancy doing the carousels. So yes, you've got to love it, but there's this point where you've got to dig in to keep going, or not necessarily keep like churning out the same shite, but like iterating. When you wrote this book, did you face resistance? Was there a bit where you just thought, this is just, I'm just up against a brick wall here? And how did you bludgeon your way through that?
Not with the book, no. But, you know, but it isn't to disagree with your point, because you've got to bear in mind, the book was just like, you know, I didn't have to think about writing the book. I just sat down and wrote it because it's the stuff that I know. And writing for me is as easy as talking. So, you know, it wasn't really any different than just sitting down and having a conversation with someone, except having a conversation with the keyboard. And it's not super long. And so no, but if I would have had to have done any research, for example, you know, not to do down the book, but I can tell you this is a book that was written with 0 seconds of research, right? I didn't have to like go and like, you know, investigate all of these like obscure case studies to find the one that made my point or whatever it might be. Anything like that would have been a completely different story. Because that's where you are moving out of the flow state and you're moving into sort of labor state. And again, using the example of the short form content, like I just so far I've kept my pipeline of ideas couple of steps ahead of my writing. So I've never had to sit down and think, oh my God, what am I going to write? That will happen. And then it's not going to be nice. But as far as possible, I try to have the systems in place to never be trying.
You've got content creator fit then, basically.
Oh yeah.
The what are the systems so you're never trying for people who are maybe wanting to put content out?
The primary one is capturing ideas when they happen, not trying to generate them when you need them. So I've got I've got a sort of a note-taking app, and 2 or 3 times a day. In fact, it's happened multiple times on this podcast, but I haven't written them down. I'll listen to it later and I'll capture them. Something comes up and I'm like, bam, post right there. And then you write it down. And then when you've got the time to write it, you sit and you look at all the ones you've written down and you say, oh, which one do I fancy? And you just do that one.
They always come to you when you're making. So I agree with that. So I was making one I had one the coffee this morning. I was making a coffee, and I had this idea. It just sort of floated to me from the ether of, if you go into Soho House and say you're a founder, everyone pats you on the back, probably wants a photo with you, puts a fedora hat on your head, sort of thing. If you go into Soho House and say you're a builder, people are, oh, what's a builder doing in Soho House? And the point is, I haven't even turned it into anything. I may not go into anything, but it's like, being a founder is very romantic. You're sat at university like, oh, let's be a founder. If we'd actually rebranded founder to builder, I reckon there'd be loads of people who are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Because that's what it is. It's a brick by brick, slog by slog. Founder's got this, but that's the kind of the point. I think for anyone listening, trying to create content, is the ideas will come from wherever, but you've just got to be able to fucking song "Catch a Falling Star" and put it in your pocket. But like that's essentially what it is, right?
So true, yeah. And that is I think that is probably that is not probably, yeah, it's definitely a learnable skill. So and it's I don't think that, as you say, the sort of the however you put it, the content creator fit is not a learnable skill. Ultimately, that's kind of just going to be, or it's not going to be, and you shouldn't force it. But assuming that you have a degree of that and that you do get pleasure from playing the game, then no question, absolutely no question, the number one skill is getting in the discipline of catching ideas when they come. That's not something anyone does naturally, but it's not a difficult thing to force yourself to do.
I nerd out on this, what's your writing process? What's your day-to-day? As Stephen Pressfield has a quote I love, which is put your ass where your heart wants to be, aka sit down in front of the keyboard and go. What's your specifics? How do you do it? Do you get up in the morning with coffee? Do you do it late at night? Have you ever heard of Hunter S. Thompson's writing process?
No.
Oh, mate, this is hilarious. And it's probably hearsay, but it's so it says 3 p.m. rise, 3:05 Shivas Regal with morning papers, Dunhills, cigarettes, 3:45 cocaine, 3:50 another glass of Shivas Dunhill, 4:05 first cup of coffee, Dunhill, 4:15 cocaine, 4:16 orange juice, Dunhill, cocaine, more ice in the Chivas, 6 a.m. grass to take the edge off. Then he goes to this 7:05 Woody Creek Tavern for lunch, Heineken, 2 margaritas, coleslaw, taco salad, a double order of onion rings, carrot cake, ice cream, bean fritter, Dunhills, another Heineken. It's just mad. But he goes into his process was just to get so wild, and that's how you write a book like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But Darwin had a thing where he did a walk every day. He had this specific walk down this garden path every single day, and that almost primed him into creativity. Like, what's the Alex Smith equivalent?
Well, before I had to start producing such a high volume of stuff, I probably wouldn't have had a good answer. But now that I'm having to do it so much, I've been sort of experimenting with things to try and see what is a sustainable system. And basically I've got one of two things, and I haven't really like landed on which one. Either spend the whole of Monday only writing and producing content to last for the week, and in terms of the actual writing itself, it's I wouldn't be able to do it in terms of the volume if it wasn't for just having absolute trust that whatever the first thing I write is good enough. So you just like, you know the general thing that you're writing about, and then I just sit down and write it, and I'm like, for better or worse, that is what it's good. That is what it is. Because if you start getting into, editing and spending a day on a post or an essay or something, we're just not going to have enough time. So, that can't be the way that you do it if this is fundamentally a marketing exercise for another business as opposed to being your whole business. So yeah, I just sit down and plow it out. I do my newsletter essays normally on the train to London on a Monday, and then the carousel stuff. I actually now write that almost like a kind of poem. Is the way I try and sort of write them, because in honor of the restful content, and then I copy paste it into my format. But I've also been experimenting with writing quite late at night, not like late, but like sort of 9-10 p.m. after we've had dinner and a relaxation and whatever, and when my wife's gone to bed, she's pregnant at the moment, so going to bed earlier than normal, and then I think, okay, I can plow out a post here, and then I don't feel like it's eating into my day. But I think that the main thing is obviously not the time that I do it, or even the mindset when I'm doing it. I think the main thing fundamentally is trust, just trusting yourself that it's trusting yourself that it's going to be good enough. And I think that really, like, this is the really brutal, harsh truth, which dare not speak its name, but we just got to like chuck it out there, because I did a course, a sort of kind of like doing LinkedIn well kind of course that was really good. But lots and lots of other people were doing it. Hundreds of other people were doing it. And, they were sort of sharing stuff on Slack and, teaming up to like each other's posts and all this kind of stuff. And the brutal fact is that, most of these people, they're not writers, and not everyone is. And of course there are other formats that might, I'm not a podcaster. I don't have a podcast, and I don't have any appetite to have a podcast. So I wouldn't do it. But you can, to be honest, you can just tell you've either got and this isn't about specifically writing, it could be about anything. Like, you're either kind of like, you've sort of got to have the knack. Because if you don't have the knack, it's not to say that you can't produce something well. That isn't the point. It's not to say anybody can produce a good piece of writing, that's for sure. But what they can't do is they can't produce it quickly enough and in high enough volume to turn it into a system, to turn it into something that they do all the time. And the only reason that I do this, in a sense, is because it is my lowest effort form of marketing. So let's just say, for sake of argument, I could be doing Facebook ads or something. Like, for most people, or for a lot of people, doing Facebook ads would be easier than doing what I'm doing now. But for me, it wouldn't. For me, that would be like absolutely like pulling teeth, and I would spend days on it, and the whole thing would just be crap. So I'm not doing these posts because I think this is the ultimate way that I can get my message out there. I'm doing it because it's the easiest way I can get my message out there.
And it's the way you can keep playing the game. Because
that's the way I can keep playing the game.
There's so many people have said to me with the podcast, it's like, why don't you like just take up some clips at the beginning and do an introduction of what's coming up on the episodes? And I'm like, I know that will get more downloads and it will get more people in. but I can't be fucked. Like, I'd rather just be prepping for the next episode. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you've got to balance out where you want to fall. It's I'd rather, as long as I'm enjoying it, and it may take an extra 3-4 years to get where I want to go to, but I'd rather do that than try and rush growth and doing something I hate. And do you know what I mean? It just falls apart.
And just pulling it back to strategy in a general sense, that is a big part of that is always about, well, the big part of it, the whole part of it is finding out the places where you have leverage and then exploiting them. I mean, someone, I was read the other day, a nice way of putting it, someone said, what is the thing that you find easy that everyone else finds hard? That's the thing to do. Not the thing that you find easy. It's got to be the thing that you find easy that other people find hard. And that is ultimately the way that that's the way that you're going to kill it. And that's where you're going to get your competitive advantage. That's where you're going to get your competitive advantage from. And of course, when people are going out there following best practice, that's the opposite of that thought process, because they're not going out, they're not thinking, they're thinking that is the thing that I should be doing. So now I'm going to force myself to do that, and then I'll be successful. That doesn't work. They got to think. What is the thing that is a complete piece of piss for me? And this also applies to a brand in general, not just a person. What is the thing that is a piece of piss for me and not a piece of piss for everyone else? And then I'm just going to hit that super hard. And then everyone's going to say, oh my God, how do you do da 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 da? And oh, I'd like to do that too, blah, 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 blah. And the answer is simply, I'm just doing the thing that I find easiest.
That's why I love tone of voice as brands. And I wrote about this in my newsletter, the content creator fit, and it applies to brands. So there's Surreal, Surreal, the cereal brand.
Yep.
That's one example. And then do you know Bold Bean Co., Amelia?
Yep.
So 2 different types of content, both very easy to them, look like works to others, feel like played, look like works to others. Paul Graham. Surreal are creating these banging, hilarious posts that are like one-liners. They're doing they're not actually on billboards. They're basically going on Photoshop or Canva and putting something on a billboard. It's going viral. So easy for them, so witty, so good. Amelia loves cooking. I know her. She's a great friend of mine. She's loved cooking for yonks. She loves creating recipes. Like, she would do it probably if she didn't have a brand. And she creates amazing recipes. People are like, oh my God, how could we create recipes? 2 very different examples, but they understand their creator content fit and their creator brand fit. Mate, we could go on as always. We'll have to do part 3, but I always love talking to you. When does the book come out? When does that land? And how can people get their mitts on it?
I don't know. But imminently.
That's good. No, I'm joking.
I know that they are in print because I got one right here. But there's a whole bunch of publishing. Nonsense of the trickle through to get into retail and all that type of thing. So
is it going into retail?
Well, when I say retail, I'm going to, whatever, I don't actually know specifically which bits of retail it's going to go into, but obviously I'm going to pile everybody through Amazon because that's just the easiest thing to do. So when I say going into retail, I really mean going into Amazon. But yeah, we'll make sure that hopefully we can make sure that the pod goes out when it is on Amazon.
Yeah, of course.
The simple thing I would say is just go to Amazon, search No Bullshit Strategy, and there it should be.
Wicked, mate. Well, look, we'll have to, next time we'll do this, we'll do it face to face. And it's always a pleasure speaking to you, mate. And yeah, thank you.
No, thanks a lot for getting me back on. It's a treat.